Thanks, Faith. Good morning, everyone. My name tag is here. That's interesting. Okay. My name is Mike Wang, and I'm an assistant professor of education at New York University. I'm also a very, very proud Berkeley alum, so it's wonderful to be back on campus and with the distinct honor of moderating today's first main stage panel focused on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander serving institutions and Alaska Native Hawaiian serving institutions, AANAPISIs and AANHSIs. AANAPISIs and AANHSIs are, of course, two of the 11 different minority serving institution designations that are administered across the federal government. The colleges and universities that become AANAPISIs and AANHSIs are the backbone of higher education for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander students. For example, as mentioned earlier, AANAPISIs account for only 6.5% of all colleges and universities across the United States and Pacific Islands, but enroll at 46% of all AA and NHPI students. Through innovative and culturally relevant academic and student support services, co-curricular programming, research and scholarship, AANAPISIs and AANHSIs foster and bolster AAPI student academic success and achievement while strengthening their civic and campus engagement, sense of belonging, among many, many other critical outcomes. So today's panel, we're going to dive a little deeper and hear from the people making all of this magic happen. So first, let me introduce Deputy Assistant Secretary Amanda Miller with the U.S. Department of Education. Also with us is the Honorable Dr. Robert Underwood, current Commissioner on the President's Advisory Commission for AA and NHPIs, President Emeritus of the University of Guam, and former Member of Congress. We have Dr. Louis Hokoana, Chancellor of the University of Hawaii Maui College, Dr. Rowena Tomeneg, President of San Jose City College and President of AAPI, and Yay to AAPI. See you all there tomorrow. And then Dr. Last but not least, Dr. Lisa Suchitani with the Department of Ethnic Studies and also Director of Engagement for the AA and NHPI Thriving Initiative here at UC Berkeley. Okay, so let me get to the first question here for Deputy Assistant Secretary Miller. So in your role at the Department of Education, as you mentioned, you oversee all Title III and Title V programs, which of course includes AANAPISIs and AANHSIs. It was really wonderful to hear the President talk about MSIs at the State of the Union. And so can you give us an update on the administration's efforts to support to support AANAPISIs and AANHSIs?
Sure. Come. You know what podcast is? Go. Is that on? It's the first bag on our shit. There we go. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you again for inviting me today. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about sort of my day-to-day work and what we do at the department, and how that benefits AANAPISIs and AANHSIs, and happy to answer questions throughout the day as well. So as I mentioned, and you mentioned the State of the Union, in the fiscal year 25 President's budget, which he just released, there was $25.8 million proposed for AANHSIs specifically, and $19.9 million proposed for AANAPISIs for fiscal year 25. We are using funds that are appropriated from Congress in a couple ways to support AANAPISIs and AANHSIs at the department specifically. One thing I wanted to mention is just making sure that everyone understands, I think most of you probably are designated AANAPISIs, but if not, the eligibility process, which you have to also do every year, as you know, even if you're already designated. So there's about 200 designated AANAPISIs. In fiscal year 23, we had 13 designated AANA schools. We are in the process now, so in the next couple of weeks should have the list released, but have really been trying to work closely with the schools to make that process, which can sometimes be complicated, as easy as possible. So look forward to hearing from you all of how we could partner to make that a smoother process for you in the future. There's currently a The ANA grant application is currently open, so I won't talk too long. I know we're short of time, but wanted to mention that for the ANAs in the room, that is open through April 29th, that grant application, and are really trying to promote through our friends on the Hill and through our friends at schools, really try to get the word out about that grant and hope we have enough. Last year, we did not have enough applicants, so really want to make sure you get the word out. And happy to talk about that later as well. What's exciting about that is I think we have a couple of priorities in that grant. We have two competitive priorities. One is for post-secondary access and success. One is for student social and emotional needs, which we've seen as a challenge in schools across the country. And hopefully these funds will be able to be supportive of that work that you all are doing. And we have two invitational priorities in that grant. One is to revitalize and preserve Native languages. And the other one for Native Hawaiian schools specifically is if you were impacted by the Maui wildfires, there's a priority in there to be able to use that funding. And then I would just mention a couple other quick grants that I think AANAPISis and AANAs can benefit from. They are designated for MSIs more broadly, as well as HBCUs and TCUs, but they've been a priority for this administration. The Post-Secondary Student Success Grant, which Berkeley actually is a recipient of, they received one in fiscal year 23, and I look forward this afternoon to learning more about it. For post-secondary success initiatives, either for new grants or to scale up initiatives that your school's already working on. The Research and Development Infrastructure Grant is to help schools move up in their Carnegie classifications. We competed that for the first time last year, and we're excited to see funding for that in the fiscal year 24 budget as well. The Hawkins grant for MSIs to help promote evidence-based teacher preparation programs. We have received $15 million for that in fiscal 24. That's also a priority of this administration. And then the last one I just wanted to mention was MISIP, which is to promote STEM for minorities and women. And those are all targeted towards MSIs and HBCUs and TCCUs specifically, including AANAPISis. And again, happy to talk about any of them and excited to have your help in getting the word out. And then just to wrap up, I would just say that, we're thinking about beyond funding, how we can better support your schools at the Department of Education and be a resource for you. So really want to hear from you all about how we could partner, build our relationship with AANAPISis and AANAs, and make sure that we're providing the resources that you need and your students need to be successful.
Thank you so much for those updates and for the important work that you're doing, Deputy Assistant Secretary Miller. If we could, take a moment to go back in history a little bit. Dr. Underwood here, as a member of Congress, is the reason why we have AANAPISis. He introduced the first legislation to create that designation. He's good. He's now a commissioner, as I mentioned earlier, on the President's Advisory Commission for AANHPIs. And you're continuing to do the work to uplift AANAPISis. And so might you share a little bit of that history with us, especially why and what your thinking was regarding the need for an MSI designation that supports AANHPI students? And how did you envision it? What were the intents? And how, as you reflect on it today, what are you thinking about that?
Well, thank you for that question. It's very long, and maybe my answer won't be as long. But good morning, Happy Day.
Happy Day.
There you go. Thank you very much. And, I'll take you back to the 20th century, which maybe some of you don't remember. But I have to go back to the 20th century. 1999, actually, there were three things that happened in 1999. This is not one of the three things, but I became chairman of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. And so the three things that happened was that the Clinton White House created the first AAPI. So we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of that this year. That's nice. The other was that there was the creation of something called the Gates Millennium Scholarship. Now, when that was created, it did not include Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I want you to know that. So that took special effort on the part of Bill Gray, who was assigned the United Negro College Fund, and I worked with him actually in trying to make sure that the GMS was extended to Asian Americans and especially to Pacific Islanders. And it was it wasn't automatically assumed, as I know many of you probably know people who became GMS scholars who may not really know the background of that. The other item was the College Board, which many of you know who are high school counselors, and they issued a report called Reaching the Top. And it was an outline of those groups of people who weren't achieving high college graduation rates. And so they issued a report on African Americans and Hispanics and Indians, and that was it. So they did not issue a report on Asian Americans, and certainly Pacific Islanders weren't part of the equation. So what I did was I went to the floor. I shamed the College Board. I deliberately shamed the College Board into giving us money, into giving TAPAC money in order to create the first summit. Now, that first summit had to identify the groups that were really being left out. Not only were Asian, but within that community who was being left out, and it was really Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders. So we had that first summit on Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders on Capitol Hill. And on the basis of that, then money started to flow on trying to create opportunities for research. Universities, different organizations started to take interest. So that's when we introduced the idea of creating an AANAPISI. So, one of the most awkward things, of course, all of you know this. Nobody really talks about it, but all of you know that this is really an awkward term. AANAPISI. Who's an ANA? Who's a PZ? Who's what? Then you have the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, and then Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, and all. It's the terms keep changing. But originally, when we started AANAPISI, we found out that AANAPISI was actually a Italian film star of lesser repute. But we didn't. We tried to avoid that. But we did introduce the legislation, and that legislation obviously has led to many of the things that are going on. That legislation didn't pass while I was in Congress. I was the first one to introduce it, but it didn't pass until a couple of terms later. So it showed you that there is always a need for advocacy. So the greatest lesson that we have to learn, I think, is that, after all of that, I went on to do other things with my life. I became president of the University of Guam, and I did other things, and I got involved here with Chancellor Louis here. And so all of these things, and then when I was appointed to be commissioner, I came back and I said, wow, there's still a lot of work to do. There's always work to do because the population has changed. The dynamics have changed. And so in order to make sure that we continue to focus on that, there's one statistic that Mike came up with that and I congratulate. I have to say that the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration has been on point in its advocacy, and it's going in the right direction. But even in fiscal year 2022, this was a statistic you should remember, that if every eligible AANAPISI secured funding on what was available by the federal government, they would have gotten $76,648. If every eligible HSI had gotten funded with what was available, they would have gotten $561,000. And if every HBCU was funded, they would have gotten $4.6 million. Now, there's a lot of historical reasons for that reality. There's nothing here, not trying to create tension, not trying to create division, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But the biggest lesson we can learn from that is you need advocacy. You need to continue to put pressure on. You need to congratulate those that are helping you, and you need to push a little on the people who aren't helping you. So that's the greatest lesson I learned on that, and even coming back. And so I just tell people that I'm a 20th century person trying to survive in a 21st century world. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Thank you very much.
That's good. Thank you, Dr. Underwood. We should know that figure was starkly lower even before this administration. So with this administration, the funding for NPCs doubled, right? So keep in mind that figure was half of what it was previously. So speaking of advocacy, but more so for supporting our students, Chancellor Hokana, I'm horrible with names, I apologize. Hokoana. I practiced so much this morning too.
And that was perfect.
Your institution, the University of Hawaii Maui College, is a Native Hawaiian serving institution. Can you share a little bit about the needs that you're seeing your students on campus require? How are the federal MSI resources, the Native Hawaiian serving student resources that you're receiving, been used to support their unique needs?
Great. And aloha, and thank you for having me this morning. I do want to first thank all of you for your tremendous support to the people that have been experiencing the difficulty with the Maui wildfires. The impacts of the wildfires have been overwhelming, but so has been the support from the world. So thank you so much for your kind thoughts and your words and your financial support from all the people of Maui. So mahalo nui loa. Let me now get to the question, and I'm so glad Representative Underwood took us to the 20th century, because I'm going to keep you there in the 20th century and tell you about a conversation I had 30 years ago. My chancellor at Maui College calls our Hawaiian faculty, there were 3 of us at the time, into a room to tell us, hey, Senator Inouye and Senator Stevens passed this wonderful legislation, Title III legislation, that allows us to provide money for Native Hawaiians. But it doesn't have to serve Native Hawaiians. It's actually to serve everybody. And we don't really have to do Native Hawaiian pedagogy. So you guys all have heard that conversation, right, before, right? That's the kinds of conversations that happened in the 20th century. So I hope those of you who started your career in the 21st century, those kinds of conversations don't happen anymore, right? So of course, they wrote the grant. It was to support the Learning Center and put up a computer lab on campus. The second time, 3 years later, I actually wrote the grant and made sure that that grant was actually serving Native Hawaiians and use the Native Hawaiian pedagogy. So when I go to a new campus on Oahu, they're using the same philosophy, right? Float the boat, the rising tide serves all, and all will rise on that tide. So I had the opportunity to do a summative assessment of how students are doing it success-wise. And sure enough, right, everybody caught that wave except Native Hawaiians, Filipino students, and Pacific Island students. So I told my chancellor, what's that all about, Chancellor? And she actually became a strong advocate of making sure that these Title III grants from her campus moving forward would address Native Hawaiians and actually use Native Hawaiian pedagogy. I'm happy to report that sense is the philosophy for the 10 campuses in the University of Hawaii system. So, what was important is, in 2020, right before COVID, the strategies had been successful in actually closing the achievement gap for Native Hawaiians on my campus. Unfortunately, that was short-lived due to COVID. We lost all those gains, and actually Native Hawaiians fared worst off in regards to enrollment and in regards to student success from the impacts of COVID. Native Hawaiians face the same kinds of barriers I think other students feel about financial resources, childcare, academic preparedness. But we did learn from Title III is that what works are programs that are purposeful in who they serve and how that service is provided. I'll end lastly by telling you that the Native Hawaiian legislation has done tremendous good work for Native Hawaiians in the University of Hawaii system. Our new strategic plan of the University of Hawaii system has an imperative that says kuleana, which means responsible to Native Hawaiians and to Hawaii. The first objective is about student success. An example of that is, and it's for those doing the work in Native Hawaiian education, of proving that Hawaii, or having students understand what it is to be Hawaii and how that impacts their success. The second objective is allowing everyone to learn about Hawaii, its history, its language, and its culture. It's about onboarding our students and about onboarding our faculty and even onboarding our regents so that they have that understanding. And the last objective is rectifying or being actively involved in the reconciliation of the injustices that were caused to Native Hawaiians. So if you told me in the 20th century that we'd be having those conversations in the 21st century, I would have told you, you would have been crazy. But it's because of this legislation and the work that people have done due to this legislation that has made that possible in the Universal Way system. So thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Hokoana, for your leadership and for sharing how you're serving Native Hawaiian students on your campus. So I'm gonna ask our next panelist, Dr. Lisa Suchitani, to bring us to the 21st century. So she's at UC Berkeley and director of the AAPI Thriving Initiative, and of course Berkeley, as mentioned earlier, is one of the newer AANAPISs on campus, and so through their AA and NHPI Thriving Initiative. So how is UC Berkeley starting to think about constructing an ecosystem that, borrowing from your words, creates conditions for AA and NHPA students to thrive?
Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay? Thanks so much for your question, Mike. On April 7th, 2023, UC Berkeley was officially federally designated as an AANAPISI. And then 2 months later, our campus received its first AANAPISI grant. So both this designation and funding insist on our reimagination and realization of new academic, co-curricular, and research opportunities in service to our Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students. More specifically, I think they insist on our becoming an AA and PI thriving institution, or as you have noted, Mike, in your own scholarship, are becoming mission-driven versus enrollment-driven in the ways that we serve our students. So since I began my role in April 2023, I've engaged with over 75 campus thought partners, units, department chairs, and alumni about what a campus ecosystem of belonging for AA and NHPI students could look like, and also one for our AA and NHPI staff and faculty who serve our students. Since 2021, our campus also has been participating in a UC system-wide AANAPISI initiative convened by the UC Office of the President to share promising practices and explore collaborations not only with other UC campuses, but also our community college and state university partners who are leading this work. One of the critical questions that has guided the work of AA and PI Thriving at Berkeley has been, what are the historical legacies that have shaped the unique institutional experiences of AA and NHPI communities on campus? As the birthplace of the term Asian American during the late 1960s as a term of political possibility, and the home to one of the first Asian American studies programs in the nation, where pioneering faculty have trained scholars and community leaders who've increased public awareness and addressed the needs, the diverse needs, experiences, and beauty of our communities. UC Berkeley has really had a rich legacy of students, staff, faculty, alumni, and community advocacy from which to draw. Another guiding question for my work has required understanding the current spaces and places where the needs of AA and NHPI communities are being articulated, addressed, and redressed. Over the years, campus and community advocates have insisted on and created multiple sites of belonging for our students, staff, faculty, and alumni, including the Asian American and Pacific Islander Standing Committee, the Asian Pacific American System-Wide Alliance, the Filipinx Faculty and Staff Association, the Asian American Research Center, and the Asian Pacific American Student Development Office, which not only houses the Asian American Political Activation Program, but also the Pacific Islander and South Asian, Southwest Asian, and North African initiatives. All of these spaces have been integral to an AA and PI thriving ecosystem for Berkeley. Of course, institutional investments by campus leadership in these efforts and spaces have been critical as well to cultivating a more inclusive campus climate. The pursuit of AANAPISI designation for our campus, for example, was but one of several recommendations that we have advanced and realized over the past 5 years alone, which have included: one, increased attention to the ways that we disaggregate, analyze, and present data about our campus populations via equity data initiatives led by our Division of Equity and Inclusion. Two, the recent inclusion of Pacific Islander, Hmong, and Laotian students within the overall underrepresented minority category for race and ethnicity. And three, the recent creation of a designated community center space for our AA and NHPI students, which I understand will be opening this fall. I think it's important to also acknowledge that campus leadership have really been critical to advancing these structural and cultural transformations as well. And while Chancellor Christ has left the room, I did want to acknowledge her leadership, her trust, and her commitment to this work, which has been so invaluable. I also want to acknowledge other campus leaders in this room who have been so critical to advancing equity and access in ways that we feel have been very, very historic for our campus. So with that, I think I'm going to stop, but thank you.
Thank you for sharing the on-the-ground work there. So we've been able to hear a little bit about some of the wonderful practices that that AANAPISis and Native Hawaiian serving institutions are doing to improve educational equity for our students. And so I'd like to ask President Tomeneg, president of San Jose City College and also the current president of AAPI, what are some of the, from your vantage point, what are some of the structural and policy challenges that you see are impacting your institution as well as the broader MSI landscape?
Thank you so much for that question, Mike, and good morning, colleagues. So as Mike said, I am the president of San Jose City College, which is a dual designated minority serving institution. My college is both an AANAPISI and an HSI. And in fact, in California, as mentioned earlier, we have the largest numbers of AANAPISis and the largest numbers of HSIs, okay? So this is the context in which I operate as a leader. So for my college, I have been blessed to be holding 3 HSI grants right now. I have 2 regular HSIs and I have a cooperative HSI with San Jose State. But one of the barriers that I continue to face as an AANAPISI leader is accessing AANAPISI grants because the process of distributing funds for MSIs puts restrictions on institutions that qualify for multiple designations. And I know that I have colleagues in the room who continue to face this. So our federal policy prevents a college like SJCC from claiming funding for both designations at the same time. And since AANAPISI is the newest, and as Dr. Underwood mentioned, still the least funded MSI program, college leaders are most likely to apply for funding under one or more of the well-known funded MSI designations, such as HSI or HBCU, et cetera. So because institutions are faced with choosing one grant over another, my longtime anxiety and fear is that our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander students will continue to be left behind in the higher education agenda for student equity and student success. This barrier also puts MSIs against one another and may negatively impact campus climate within dual or multiple designation institutions. So this is the work that This is our work for the current time. And so Dr. Underwood and my other esteemed colleagues have talked about the need to collectively advocate and that we need to do more work around this. So I want to just sort of end with my two major policy recommendations that we need to keep talking about and advocate for. So the first one is that calling on our policymakers to increase the investments in AANAPISIs by appropriating $100 million annually through a combination of both mandatory and discretionary spending to ensure all eligible AANAPISIs receive funding. It's not equitable that if you divided up the 200 AANAPISIs with the existing funding, that we only receive 76,000. That is not even enough to hire a staff member with benefits, okay? So we need to increase the funding. Secondly, I want to call on our policymakers to really look at this issue of removing the multiple designation barrier that prevents AANAPISIs and all other MSIs from accessing funding from multiple MSI designations. I know that through the combination of funding that we can apply for post-secondary, student success and others, but I think this barrier really hampers institutions from serving our AA and NHPI students. This option, if we remove the multiple designation barrier, will also enable our institutions to access the needed resources. And I'm going to call out mental health because we know mental health continues to impact our AA and NHPI students. So this is the advocacy work that I invite all of you to join our organizations and also AAPI, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next couple of days so that we can better strategize to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you, President Somanek. So certainly the multiple designation issue is a major policy priority for AANAPISIs and AANAs. But I should note at the end of the day, this is a legislative issue that requires Congress to pass a law. So hence the advocacy with members of Congress, right? Of course, it isn't just a one branch project, right? There are some aspects that the executive branch can do to help facilitate this process. And so, Dr. Underwood, in 1 minute, because we're running out of time, as a commissioner, what is some of the work you're doing in this area to address some of the problems that President Tomanek just brought up?
Okay, 1 minute. All right, here's the deal. As a commissioner, in our February meeting, we did pass. I'm the head of the co-chair of the Data Disaggregation and Higher Ed Subcommittee of the Advisory Commission. So we really are focused on this issue for the first time this year on higher ed. So we passed 4 specific recommendations in our last Las Vegas meeting, which of course Dr. Tumening has mentioned about the dual designation issue. And I know that the Deputy Assistant Secretary is doing everything she can, but of course her hands are tied by the legislation. So, we shouldn't think of her as an unfriendly part of this policy apparatus. I wanted to say that. Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that. So, but basically the issue is multifaceted. One is the dual designation issue, which forces higher ed administrators. And if you haven't been in higher ed administrator, you'll know this. It's a Sophie's choice kind of moment. Like, do I pick this or do I pick that? And you pick the one that's more lucrative. That's one. So the other, stop. My minute is up. So, but there's 2 other items. There's 2 other items, and I have to get this in. One is MSI designation. MSI designation exists in almost every federal agency. Every federal agency has an MSI program. But when you tell them that you're an AANAPISI, they say, oh, no, that doesn't apply to you. That only applies to HSIs or African-American institutions because they're generally ignorant about the whole nature of MSIs. And so that's what our recommendation called for the U.S. Department of Education to help us advertise and clarify and get that definition out to all federal agencies, whether they're Department of Defense or EPA or just all of the federal agencies. And the last item is counting students, the demographics of it all. And this particularly affects Pacific Islanders in a way that it may not affect others. And that is that most Pacific Islanders put down their 2 races. And when they put down their 2 races, they don't get count. They just disappear. And this was pointed out in a recent study at UNLV when the official count is like 200 plus Pacific Islanders attend UNLV. But when you go to UNLV, they're everywhere, and you're wondering, how do they only count 200? And then, are they not understanding the count? If they count 2 races, what happens? That's my second stop sign. If they count 2 races, they don't get counted at all. But when they surfaced the numbers went up to over 1,600. So just remember that. Thank you very much.
We need like an orchestra to do the playing out music. So let me just close out by saying thank you to our amazing panelists who day in and day out are just committed to uplifting our communities. Thank you. And thank you to you all for all the work that you're doing. Thank you.